Hey guys, I know the last video kind of cut off mid-sentence, but we are going to finish the book today. There's only maybe 10 pages. Okay. Ben scowled. He appeared to be gathering his strength. Foolish nephew, Torin Crane, he rasped. In the pine tree? Who could have been killed? Ben's voice sank to a whisper, and the audience strained to hear. By my foolish accents. Dune stood stunned. Torin was Ben's nephew? That was a surprise. But it was even more of a surprise to hear Ben almost apologizing for what he had done. Lena was thumping Dune on the back. Someone behind him cried out, 3 cheers for Dune! And 3 cheers rang out in the ballroom. Dune just stood there with what he thought was probably a silly smile on his face. Then Mary stepped forward and called for quiet again. Her voice grew steady and businesslike. Now, she said, we must look to our future. You will not get everything you want, neither will we. All of us will suffer, perhaps even be in danger. There will be more mouths to feed, but more hands to do the work, too. And though we may have a shortage of food, we have no shortage of work. She paused. She smiled a little. Her eyes passed over the people in the room, and Dune felt her gaze almost like a reassuring touch. The main thing, she said, is this. We will refuse to be each other's enemies. We will renounce violence, which is so easy to start, but so hard to control. We will build a place where we can all live in peace. If we hold to that, everything is possible. Someone clapped. Dune turned around and saw his father clapping with his hands held high in the air. There is much to be worked out, Mary said. It won't be easy, but we'll talk about it together. She paused for a second, and a change came over her face, the beginning of a smile. One more thing, she said. We will no longer speak of the people of Sparks and the people of Ember. From now on, we are all the people of Sparks. A rustle swept through the crowd. Both Dune and Lena felt a pang of sorrow. To call themselves people of Sparks meant leaving behind the last trace of their old name. The villagers too felt a pang. For them it was a pang of fear. These were their people now? Could they really live peacefully together? But the sorrow and the fear lasted only a few seconds. Everyone was tired of sorrow and fear. Whatever lay ahead they thought would probably be better. They were willing to try it. After that they turned to the practical details. Actually, said Alma Hogan, the storehouse manager, there's a fair amount of food in the storehouse. It's just like we never use it all up. This year we'll expect to use it all and hope we can replenish it next year. I'm afraid a great deal of it is pickles, though. By the end of winter, we may all be eating more pickles than anything else. Dune's father mentioned politely that the hotel residents would have to have decent houses sooner or later. Mary said they would start building some of them now out behind the meadow. The best of Sparks builders would be in charge, and they would teach the Emberites construction. The houses will be small, Mary said, and we'll be able to build only a few before the rain comes. Most of you will have to spend the winter in the hotel. Clary stood up to announce that her garden was producing well. In addition to cucumbers, melons, and peppers, she had grown nearly 100 butternut squashes, which would help keep through the winter. That would help a little. The villagers looked at her curiously. Butternut squashes? They had never heard of them. I grew them from seeds I brought from Ember, Clary said. I brought all the seeds I had, all kinds. Next year I'll be able to grow more. Mrs. Murdo said she had learned a great deal in her time with the doctor. She would like to be assistant doctor. It's clear that this community needs more than one, she said. I know something about plants, said Maddie, speaking up for the first time. I wish to be assistant hotel gardener with Clary Lane. Edward Pocket said he demanded to be made official librarian. Mary looked surprised. We don't have a library, she said. Exactly right, said Edward. You have a disorderly heap of books. I have made great progress with them, however. I invite you to come by and see. Ben Barlow kept muttering dire warnings about crop failures and vitamin deficiencies and epidemics, but Mary said they would cope with those problems when and if they actually occurred. Little by little, people began to feel interested in how this new arrangement was going to work. There were endless questions. What if there were arguments? How would they be settled? Would the Emirates go back to eating with their lunchtime families? Would they get enough for dinner and breakfast? What would happen when they needed other things than food, like shoes or soap or hats? The trouble is, said Mrs. Polster, we don't have anything. We can't trade for the goods at the market because we don't have anything you want. But Doone saw the solution to this right away. We do, he said. Mrs. Polster raised her eyebrows at him. She wasn't used to being contradicted. We have one thing that you need, said Doone. Matches. We still have a lot left. We could use them to trade with at least for a while. 2 matches for a pair of shoes, let's say. People laughed and clapped. It was perfect. Ben said in his opinion a pair of shoes was worth at least 5 matches, but no one paid much attention. All of this will get worked out, Mary said. It's going to involve disagreement, and it's going to involve hardship. But we have endured hardship before. We can do it again. Wilmer sighed. It's just that we hoped we wouldn't have to, he said. Mary shot him a stern look. We can do it again, she repeated, and we will. Last chapter, chapter 29. 3 amazing visits. Lena gave up on trying to persuade Mrs. Murdo to move to the hotel. Since they'd all have their own houses sooner or later, they might as well stay at the doctor's house until then. Besides, Mrs. Murdo was so intent on learning to be assistant doctor that it seemed unkind to take her away. Lena and Maddie took on the job of harvesting and preserving the produce from the doctor's vegetable garden. Every morning they picked baskets of tomatoes and beans and peppers and corn and squash. Every afternoon they sliced tomatoes and laid them in the sun to dry. They took dried beans out of their pods and put them in jars. They cooked peppers and packed them in olive oil. They tied bunches of herbs with string and hung them up to dry. Poppy puttered around their feet, helping by sprinkling dry leaves here and there or banging spoons on pots. Even Torrin, whose feet were healing, often chose to hang around with Lena and Maddie. He said he knew how to make a garlic braid, so they gave him a basket of garlic and he made one. One afternoon, as she and Maddie were cutting green beans for dinner, Lena heard wheels crunching on the road outside. The next moment she heard the whuffling of an ox, and then Torrin sprang up and limped as fast as he could to the front of the house. Uh-oh, thought Lena. Is it who I think it is? It was. There was Casper's battered truck, and there was Casper just climbing out of it. He looked grubby. His mustache drooped. Torrin ran toward him, crying, Casper, Casper! And Casper smiled in a tired way. Hey, brother, he said. He thumped Torrin's back a couple of times. Then he started toward the house. Lena and Maddie went out to meet him. When he saw them, he stopped and glared. Deserters, he said. But he didn't seem to have the energy to berate them any farther. He trudged into the house and plunked down on the couch. Torrin plunked down beside him. I have been waiting and waiting for you, Torrin said. Why didn't you come back with them? He flicked his hand toward Lena and Maddie. I had important work to do, said Casper, which they didn't want to help with. And what happened with your work? Asked Maddie, standing by the door. Did you find what you wanted to find? Casper didn't even look at her. He closed his eyes and slumped against the back of the couch. My numbers, he said, need readjusting. They were completely right, except for one thing. What thing was that? Asked Maddie. Wrong city, said Casper, still without opening his eyes. I have reworked the numbers. Tomorrow I head north. Maddie and Lena exchanged a look. Casper turned his head toward Maddie and squinted at her. I suppose you don't want to come, he said. No, thank you, said Maddie. I plan to stay here, where something with real potential is beginning. Torrin tugged on Casper's arm. Did you bring me something this time? He asked. Casper opened his eyes. He looked at the ceiling for a while. Well, yes, he said. I did. What? Shrieked Torrin. What is it? Can I have it now? It's out in the truck, said Casper. I found a whole crate of them. Very unusual. You can have one. One what? Let's go get it. Torrin darted to the door. Casper heaved himself up and they went outside. Lena watched as Casper rooted around in one of his crates. He came up with something she recognized with a start. She hadn't seen one for a long time. It was like seeing something that belonged to an old friend, now dead. What is it? Said Torrin. A light bulb, said Casper. I found a case of 48 of them, all unused. But what does it do? Torin asked, peering inside the light bulb as if he expected to see something alive in there. He tapped the glass with his fingernail. It gives light, said Casper, if you have electricity. But we don't have electricity. That's right, Casper said wearily, so you hold on to it in case someday we do. Torin went to the window seat and sat there turning the bulb around and around in his hands. Lena watched him, thinking about Ember. People have figured it out once, she thought. They could do it again. A few days after Casper left, there was another visitor to the doctor's house. Lena was out in the courtyard at the time, cracking walnuts with a rock. She saw someone approaching the gate, a bent figure walking slowly and somehow crookedly. She stood up. The person seemed to be having trouble with the gate latch, so she went to help, and that was when she realized it was Ben Barlow. His injured arm was bandaged and strapped to the side, and the jacket he wore was draped over it with the sleeve hanging empty. That was why he looked lopsided. "Good afternoon," said Ben. "I wonder if Torin is here?" "He is," said Lena. "I'll go get him." She found Torin out in back of the house, sitting under a tree, eating a hunk of bread. "Your uncle has come to see you." Torin stared at her. "My uncle?" He sounded both excited and scared. He jumped up, shoving the bread into his pocket. When Ben saw Torin coming toward him, he frowned. Then, as if catching himself, he changed his expression to a smile. "Hello, nephew. How are you getting on?" he said. Torin looked wary. "Fine," he said. "Good," said Ben. He stroked his beard. Linda wondered if that was all he had to say. Torin filled the silence. "Is your arm still attached to you?" he said. "Yes," said Ben, "just barely." He started to frown into the air again and then thought better of it. He sat down on a bench. "Well, I thought I'd just come and see you. Haven't seen you for a while." "Years," said Torin. "Well, yes, busy life, you know, being a town leader. Many decisions to make, matters of right and wrong to grapple with." "Oh," said Torin. Lena could tell he was thinking the same thing she was. Why has he come? "Sometimes one makes the right decision," said Ben. "Sometimes not." "I guess so," said Torin. Ben readjusted his bandaged arm. Lena saw that his beard was not as neatly trimmed as usual. Probably he had a hard time doing it with his left hand. She was pretty sure Ben didn't have a wife. She had never heard anyone mention one. "Well," said Ben, "you were fortunate, weren't you, getting pulled out of that tree?" "Yes," said Torin. "I am forced to acknowledge," said Ben, "that it was my fault. That fire." "I guess so," said Torin. "An accident," said Ben, "but one that did not have to happen." "Uh-huh," said Torin. Ben got to his feet with painful slowness. "So," he said, "enjoyable talking with you. No doubt we should get to know each other. You must come by for a visit sometime, though of course I'm rarely home." "You're very busy," said Torin. "That's right," said Ben. He made his way toward the gate with his limping step. As he went out, he waved over his shoulder with his good hand, but he didn't turn around. Slowly, he started back toward the village. "That was an apology," Lena said to Torin when Ben was gone. "He's sorry for doing what he did. I guess he's sorry for not being a good uncle, too, for not taking you to live with him." "Live with him?" said Torin. He made a horrible face. "Well, I thought you weren't happy living with Dr. Hester," Lena said. "You never seem very happy." "I am too happy," said Torin crossly. He sat down on the bench that Ben had just left and pulled a hunk of bread from his pocket. A few little birds were hopping nearby. Absently, Torin tossed some crumbs. He seemed to be thinking. "I like it here," he said to Lena, and he looked up at her with his eyes all round, as if he had only just discovered this himself. The next day, Dune came to the door of the doctor's house carrying a sack. Kenny was with him, standing slightly behind Dune and peering cautiously past him into the room. "I have to show you this," Dune said to Lena. "I made it with the present you brought me." "He's kind of a genius," Kenny said. "He already showed me." Dune set the stack on the window seat. It was only just after dinner time, but the days were shorter now and the sun was nearly down. Dr. Hester had already lit 2 candles. She and Mrs. Murdo and Maddie were sitting at the table shelling lima beans. Poppy was sitting with them, tearing the bean pods into tiny pieces. All 4 came over to see what Dune had brought. Torrin came too. He was actually more interested in showing Dune what he had than in seeing what was in the sack. "I got a present from Casper," he said. "Great," said Dune, but he wasn't really listening. Lena could see how excited he was about whatever he had in the sack. His eyes shone in the candlelight and his hand fidgeted impatiently with the string around the sack's neck. When he got it untied, he reached into the sack and brought out a small device made of wood and metal. Some sort of machine, Lena thought. It had a coil of wire, and inside the coil she saw the magnet she had given Dune. There was a handle that looked as if it had made something turn. Lena, not being much interested in machines, was a little disappointed. It was clear that Torrin was disappointed too. "Want to see my present from Casper?" he said. "In a minute," said Dune. "Let me show you this first." "What does it do?" Lena asked. "Is it some kind of can opener?" asked Mrs. Murdo. "Or maybe it's a sort of mixer?" said the doctor. "Or a drill?" said Maddie. "Nope," said Dune happily, and Kenny, his face shining with a shared secret, whispered, "Nope," too. "You won't believe it," Dune went on, "but it makes electricity. I found the directions for it in a book called Science Projects, but I couldn't try it out because before I didn't have a magnet. I didn't even know what a magnet was, but then you brought me one, Lena, and just the other day I remembered about this project." He took the machine over to the table and set it down. "What you do is you turn this crank and that turns the magnet, and that generates the electricity and runs it down these wires. It's supposed to be enough to light a light bulb. The trouble is I can't test it because I can't find any light bulbs that aren't broken." Torrin started jumping up and down. He pounded on Dune's arm. "My present from Casper! My present from Casper!" he yelled. He bolted into the medicine room. "What's the matter with—" said Dune, but Lena broke in. "Dune," she said, "his present from Casper is a light bulb, unused." Torrin came out of the medicine room carrying the light bulb encased in both hands, walking now fast but with stiff legs, being extremely careful. "You won't break it, will you?" he said to Dune. "Your experiment won't blow it up, will it?" Dune gazed at the light bulb as if it was the most wonderful thing he had ever seen. Gingerly, he reached for it. "I'll be very, very careful," he said. "You can help me, Torrin. Hold the light bulb right here." He showed Torrin where to put the bulb, and he wound 2 loose wires around the metal end. "Now," he said, "blow out the candles." Lena blew them out. The room went dark. Dune began turning the crank of his machine. At first nothing happened except that the magnet turned around. Dune cranked faster and faster, and a glimmer appeared in the light bulb. First a glimmer and then a glow, and then the bulb shone with a faint but steady white light. Lena shrieked. Poppy shrieked too, because Lena had, and both the doctor and Mrs. Murdo gasped and broke into applause. Kenny beamed, glancing between the light bulb and Dune's face. Torrin was being too careful to make a noise, but his eyes grew wide and his mouth dropped open. For almost 3 minutes, until his hand got too tired, Dune turned the crank of his machine around and around and around. The doctor wagged her head in wonder. Mrs. Murdo turned her face away to hide her tears, and Torrin held on tight to the light bulb, even though it was getting very warm. Lena gazed at the light shining on everyone's faces. Full to the brim with hope and love and joy, she watched the little light bulb shining like a promise in the night. And that is the end of The People of Sparks. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye.